Okay, I think we should get started. So good afternoon. Welcome to LGC Pulse. For those who don't know me, my name is Cynthia Loren, and I'm the founder and lead strategist at LGC Africa. We're an Africa-focused niche consulting practice. We work with professional service organizations who are seeking to scale up and improve their marketing and business development activity. We're primarily focused on law firms, but increasingly we work with other types of professional services businesses. LGC Pulse is a regular marketing insight session that we hold, and we ask invited guests to come along and share their knowledge and wisdom about leadership and also about what it takes to grow and maintain a successful business, particularly in Africa. So our special guest this afternoon is Mr. Stephen Karangizi. He's the Outgoing Director and CEO of the Africa Legal Support Facility, or the ALSF. The ALSF is an international organization that's hosted by the African Development Bank, for those of you that don't know, and it's focused on providing legal advice and technical assistance to African countries in the negotiation of complex commercial transactions. So the idea with the ALSF is really about leveling up the playing field in terms of African legal capacity. Steve has been the director and the CEO of the facility for a decade. Today is actually his last day at ALSF, he tells me. And as his tenure comes to an end at the ALSF, he's very kindly agreed to spend some time with us today, just sharing his knowledge, his wisdom, and some key leadership lessons that he has learned from his time at ALSF and also from his experiences prior to that. So Steve has been a leader on the African continent for many, many decades. He's an advocate of the High Court of Uganda, a legal practitioner of the High Court of Zimbabwe. He's been a legal advisor to governments in the West Indies, Deputy Secretary General of COMESA, and also chairman of the United Nations Commission on International Trade, and obviously most recently, the ALSF. So Steve, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to be my guest this afternoon. It's a conversation that I've personally wanted to have for a long time, so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity, and I feel particularly privileged today being the last day, so I feel like we timed that very well. In terms of format for this session, there's quite a bit that I want to cover in the short time that we have. I'm going to start off by asking you about your initial journey that led you to the ALSF. We're going to talk about some of the leadership highs and lows that you've experienced in the course of your career so far. And then we're going to talk about perhaps some practical tips around leadership and your views on what it takes to make a great leader. At the end of the session, we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So if you do have questions that you would like to ask Steve while we have him, please do shoot those across in the Q&A section, and we will cover as many of those as we can at the end. So welcome, Steve. First question to you. So I want to just get you to briefly tell us about your role. Not many, I mean, people know of the ALSF, but they may not know in detail what it is that the facility does. But it would be great if you could tell us about your role specifically at the ALSF, the organization's vision, mission, and focus.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, and also thank you for arranging this and for inviting me. I'm really pleased to share my knowledge and experience, and so I also greet all the listeners. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Really a pleasure to share with you my experience, my knowledge. In terms of your first question, the role of the CEO is really to coordinate the business of the facility. So the facility, in terms of a mission, the bigger mission is to develop as much as possible sustainable legal capacity for the continent. So here we have a situation where previously legal advisory services were really looked at only in the context of governments having in-house legal capacity. But we all know that across the continent, for most of the countries, that part of the government functioning has not been growing. And nobody looked at legal services, especially private legal services, as having a potential to contribute to development. So my role is to ensure that we deliver on that, on the strategy of the facility, which means keeping a strategic vision, You've mentioned some of the parts of a core mandate as a facility, which is really providing advisory services to the government to ensure that there is a level playing field. How did this come about? It came about because previously all investments were done by governments. But we now have private sector investments, infrastructure, mining, and so on, and the governments have to negotiate with them. You also have litigation against governments. Quite often, you will be surprised, governments do not actually defend themselves when there is litigation against them, especially in international fora. So the governments approach us and ask us for assistance. So the role of the director is to assess the requests and provide initial advice to the governments as to how they can navigate the relevant area that they need support in. Once that support is identified as critical, then the role of the director and his team is to develop the necessary project proposal for consideration by the board and approval. And then once the implementation starts, the director also has a critical role to keep engaging the government to ensure that there is a harmonious negotiations taking place between the investors and the government. So the role is quite wide. So that's on the operational side. But it is also an international institution, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So we have a board, we have a governing council. Like any institution, even that process has to be managed. So you have to coordinate with the chairpersons of those two bodies. And then you also have to manage staff. You have to manage the secretariat. That's the third body of the facility. So that is, I would say, the corporate side. So the director also has the responsibility of coordinating that corporate side. So it's like any international institution you can think of, might be small, but with a huge task, as you would appreciate.
Yeah. And tell us, Steve, what was the journey that actually got you to the ALSF? Because I know you've done quite a bit before you got there, you know.
Yeah.
What was the journey, or what was it that you wanted to kind of achieve when you got there?
Yeah, so I think I'm one of those few people who have done all public and private sector. I actually initially started off in private sector in a law firm. I think I might tell some people, they would be embarrassed to know that my first year of working was in private sector and I was not paid at all. I had been a student leader and I found myself leaving the country, you know, the usual chaos you have in Africa. I found myself in another country. The only job I could get was a law firm and they didn't pay me at all. But I worked a ton of work and I learned a lot. Then I went into public sector, so government. So I ended up working for 3 governments. After the 3 governments, I worked for an international institution. So you can say I had an all-rounded experience. And when I was working with the regional organization, that's COMESA, I was actually a general counsel for 14 years, 2 of them acting and 12 of them substantive. The work was more or less similar to the facility, especially on the infrastructure side. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of regional infrastructure and then establishing institutions. I helped establish so many institutions. One of them, the equivalent of MIGA in Africa called ATI, mm-hmm. And many others. The only functioning regional competition agency in Malawi, that's the COMESA competition agency. I even assisted, in fact, I could say I almost did all the work establishing a regional court. So I had an all-rounded experience, both the public service with the governments and with the regional organization doing similar kind of work as the facility did. So my fit into the facility was easy. And my last post at the regional organizations, that's COMESA, was as the Deputy Secretary General. I actually downscaled from managing 200 people to start a facility which had only 6 people, but I'm glad we now have about 35 people and it's quite big. So that was the journey. I think I had accumulated both the legal expertise in the areas, particularly infrastructure, negotiations and development, because we also used to outsource law firms, and also in terms of management. Actually, the management aspect, I think, was absolutely critical because you cannot lead an organization like this if you do not either have the experience in management or develop the skills.
Yeah, Yeah, no, absolutely. And what was it about the ALSF that drew you? You know, what was it that you saw that you thought this is the role I really want to do?
I had the opportunity of interacting with most African governments. It was obvious that one of the biggest problems they had, challenges they had in terms of attracting investment, was that deals were taking too long. Private investors do not wait for a long time because capital, to invest capital, first of all, is a big decision. Mm-hmm. And it's more complicated. Yet governments were always used to debt investment for most of their projects. So it was obvious in my dealings with the government over the years that the notion of a facility that assists them bridge the gap, level the playing field, was really a no-brainer, and it would make a big difference for many of them. Just before I came to the facility, I went to one new state, which had been established for professional reasons, I won't mention it. And they had just given away land, which could constitute an area of something like 100,000 square kilometers. Wow. And when I asked them for the agreements, they didn't even know what was contained in the agreements. And that was about the time ALSF opportunity came up, and I just snapped at it because I knew it would be an opportunity to make a difference on the continent.
And on that sort of point of making a difference, what for you has been the best part of the role? You know, what's the highlight, or what have been some of the highlights of your time at ALSF?
So I think there are so many, it's difficult to put a point on one, but I think the biggest highlights were the cases we won, or cases that where we intervened and made a big difference. Now we are talking about multi-billion-dollar cases. Mm-hmm. One of them, subsequently, the government messed up a bit. They went behind our back and started talking with the institution that had sued them, the entity that had sued them, despite the fact that the entity realized after we started supporting the government that they were going to lose that case. So it's that kind of impact that has been the major highlight. You really feel the difference. Yeah. And one of the other cases, the award was about to be given in a huge arbitration case. When we came in, that stopped, and eventually we helped the government to win that particular case. And you're talking of millions of dollars. And there are even some more recent ones where we've intervened. So on the litigation side, you have immediate impact. The investment side, I would not mention it as a highlight, but we'll talk. But they are also major because you have investors then having confidence and proceeding with an investment that would otherwise not have taken place if the facility was not available across the table.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, that ability to really shift the dial and see significant changes. You've talked, Steve, about a situation where you actually had to downsize a team, you know, where you reduced the team. You've built a very significant team at ALSF. You're obviously surrounded by a fantastic group of people, some of whom are on this webinar today. You've no doubt had your fair share of recruiting for the various organizations that you've been involved in. Tell us a little bit about some of the qualities that you seek out when you're considering employees. You know, what are the things that you look for when you're hiring people? And then conversely, what are some of the qualities that you've observed that you consider to be turnoffs? Because I think that's quite an interesting perspective from you as a senior leader.
That's right, Cynthia. I think those are very important issues that you're highlighting. So what I was actually saying, in my previous role, I was supervising, I would say maybe about 8 directors and 200 personnel. And on average, I was chairing recruitment panels almost every month, at least 2 or 3 panels. So that was quite heavy. Then I came to the facility and had to recruit afresh. So really, you develop the knack of identifying the best talent that you can get. And the talent is out there. I think the first thing you look in the eyes of the person and look for that enthusiasm, burning fire to execute the mandate. And you also there are some things you look at, like attention to detail. You might consider it light, but you can always tell if the person will have attention to detail. And where we've tended to concentrate, and miss that out, you end up seeing that in reality, in practice, the person fails. By attention to detail, I mean, if somebody comes to your interview and they've not even looked at the website of the institution, then please don't even go to the next step, because that person doesn't have the fire in their belly and will not attend to detail as you expect. And then teamwork, that you can only tell when the person comes on board. But as a CEO also, I was lucky. A small institution, it is easier to build a culture. There are certain values that you expect in a workplace. If you build them, your team can relate to them. So if somebody joins and you realize that they are not ready to adopt the culture that you have created, then those are red signals. So you look for teamwork. If you have younger people who have not worked in many places, they are usually more adaptable to a new work culture. I also realize that. But that doesn't always follow, but in terms of comparisons only. So you can shape them, and they should be also ready to learn, because we are all learning all the time. I am still learning.
Absolutely. And just, on the, I guess, just that last comment you made about learning, what would you say would be the biggest lesson that you've learned as a leader, or put a different way, what are maybe some of the biggest challenges that you've had, thinking particularly about this time that you've just concluded at the ALSF? What would you say has been the hardest thing?
Well, I would say that I think the major issue you have is what I was trying to mention, the human skills. People call them soft skills, but I think there are people around calling them now human skills. So you need the technical capacity. That's what they sometimes call the hard skills. That should already be there, CV, education, and so on. But the additional skills is that human skills. Is the person responsive? Are you adaptable to change? Which means you will accept innovation. When I came in, I think my team, the team that was there and those who came subsequently, didn't expect me to be that responsive. Fortunately, I've always been responsive. So we embraced technology. Actually, by the time the pandemic hit, we were far ahead in terms of working offline. We didn't need to be coming to this office. So you can imagine, what does that tell you? We started embracing technology in my second year. And most of it was innovation by the team themselves, young people who had already knew and they were researching what is happening, following up on ideas. So I think that innovation part, so that's all part of the human skills. Does somebody have the enthusiasm to know? So the challenges come with, in terms for an institution like this, in terms of, we had challenges, first of all. As an institution, we had to sell ourselves, first of all, to the governments to trust you. How does the government entrust you with a multi-billion-dollar investment when they are by nature, the governments are secret? Then we also had to raise resources. How do you convince benefactors that they provide you with resources for an unproven idea? Because as I said, some of the comments we got initially from potential donors was, you want us to pay to hotshot lawyers who are already getting millions of dollars, the usual thinking about private sector lawyers. So you need to prove the idea. So we had to prove the idea. And of course, the other one is building the team. Those were major challenges. But through persistence, once you are convincing, you have to be convincing. You have to believe in the mission. And I think we turned that around and everybody started believing in us. But the trust idea maintaining trust between the institution and the stakeholders is a critical thing. They have to believe in you and likewise your team. So you impact that onto the team and explain to them. There are certain niceties that you have to learn. I mean, you have to have the humility for people to understand that you are delivering on something that you believe in. Yeah,
absolutely. And given everything that you've now achieved with your time at ALSF, you are passing on the mantle to Olivier Poignant. Today's your last day. What would you say, what would you consider to be some of the key hopes that you personally have for the ALSF? What would you like to see the ALSF become or be in the next 10 years from now?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very important, Cynthia. So we are lucky that the governing bodies of the facility just managed to extend the lifetime of the facility for another 14 years after 2022. So we are talking of 2036. We now have a brand. Everybody understands, or most people understand what we do and the impact that we bring on board. So what is my biggest hope? So my biggest hope is that we can make our resource base sustainable. That's my first big hope. Then the second big hope is increase of understanding and utilization of African lawyers. We've been depending mainly on external lawyers because of the procurement competitive practice that we inherited. Yeah. Fortunately, when you're getting resources on grant basis, they insist on procurement processes that are competitive, and our African law firms are not yet that competitive. Not all, I mean, there are very few that are, and we've used quite a number of the African ones that we felt are that were competitive. So I think that's the biggest part, because remember I started by saying we set our mission to be attaining sustainable legal capacity on the continent. So I want those big deals to be negotiated by mainly African lawyers, African law firms in that 10 years and so on going forward. And I want governments to know, they already know, but to increase their going to the ALSF as the go-to institution for their deals and so on. Yeah, and I think all of us on this webinar would definitely second all of those ambitions. So yeah, looking forward to what happens next. I'd like to ask you a bit now about your particular leadership journey, your personal leadership journey. So who've been some of the mentors or key influences in your life, in your leadership journey, and why? Oh, I have so many, and I am so lucky that I always had somebody everywhere I went. But I mentioned that I'm still learning. And I was so lucky when I started the first public service job in Zimbabwe. It was a hectic time when they were trying to shift from what you would call kind of a colonial system to an independent, post-independence system. And they brought on board a lot of African expatriates, very experienced. So for all the junior lawyers, they provided us with a mentor. So I started with a mentor who had huge experience, was a Ghanaian lawyer called Jacob Bayi. So that was probably my first mentor. In the private practice it was just work, and with no pay, as I mentioned, but it was still enjoyable, and I developed a lot of experience. And then when I went to the Caribbean, I found another Ghanaian lawyer. So another coincidence, Lebrecht Hesse. So that was another mentor. I learned a lot from him. Then I went to COMESA. The general counsel who recruited me, a lady, retired now, Howard Sinare, also became my mentor because I was always learning. After she left, I became the general counsel, and then my boss, who was the Secretary General, became my mentor. Now, the thing about that particular boss of mine, he was called Erastus Mwencha. He believed in leadership development. So I did all the courses you can think of, developing as a person, understanding what a person you need, the ring of 6, addressing for balance of life, your health, education, not just the work. Yeah. And all that. So I would call him a mentor. So I did all those kind of, how do you develop a team, teamwork, all those kind of courses. So that by the time I became Deputy Secretary General, it was very easy. When I left, my team still looks out to me, but it's because I was practicing what I had learned. When I came to the facility, I would not put any particular person being a mentor, but I would say anybody I dealt with, I would listen. Listening is the most important. Also becomes indirectly a key person. So I think that's the most important thing. Listening and reacting. We had a board. I mean, the board never believed that anything they said, we debated it openly and transparently because you've developed the skills. The same with my team. Encouraging the team always to say what they think, especially lawyers. If they can't say what they think, then you cannot develop the team. Even the youngest lawyer can make a suggestion that is absolutely important. So that has been my journey, continuously learning, being ready to learn, embracing technology. There's a lot of material on the internet these days one can learn from it. I keep a huge folder of management articles. Up to today, I've kept it for almost 23 years.
Wow.
So whenever I need to check something, how to manage a team, how I go and refresh and always look for the best experts. But Cynthia, you can say all that, but in practice, it is not easy. So a little bit of patience in practice. You know, people say teamwork, develop teamwork, but in practice, it's not easy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of patience, there's a lot of team building, and I think I've been successful at doing that at the facility. But a lot of it also comes with enabling the team, empowering the team. If you do not empower them, if you micromanage them, they will run away from you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I'd love to hear more about how you've tried to foster some of those traits and qualities within the team. So you've talked about teamwork, you've talked about innovation, you've talked about articulating yourself, being able to express what you really think. How in a practical way can leaders do that? So someone that's running an organization, be it a law firm or a school or whatever, how do you foster that within your team? What are some of the tips or steps? So
the first thing to do is you all have to read from the same script. You have to have the same understanding of the institution on the same level. You have to be at the same level. You have to share the mission and then share the passion. So how did I pass on? Immediately I arrived the first week, I told everybody we are starting on a medium-term strategy. I called the board within 1 week. They tried to resist. I gave them a retreat. They actually resisted. They didn't want the retreat. They said, what is it for? It's too early. I said, we have to have a retreat. We had a retreat to consider the medium-term strategy, which we are developing. Within 7 months, we had a strategy developed by the stakeholders themselves. So that's the first thing. Then once you have the strategy, rolling it out, I think the second biggest most important thing was team building. And then convincing the team that they had the power to do what I was giving them. There is a bit of resistance because in most work environments, managers and lower staff do not actually have power. Convincing somebody that you can go and talk with the minister. I had 2 or 3 staff, especially lady staff, who went and met permanent secretaries, and the permanent secretaries refused to meet them because they felt they were young, maybe a 30-year-old. I insisted that the best way to learn, I started doing that when I was at that age, fortunately, because I had mentors who released me and released my energy. So that was the next phase. Then once you do that and people know that they're empowered, it's like you're releasing them from a shell. So that's what I did. That's how I translated those leadership skills into the people. Then as you go along, of course, you start meeting different challenges. Maintaining the harmony within the team is the most important. And that means you have to have repeated retreats, repeated discussions. We didn't do enough of that as I would have wanted because we really had a lot of work. We were a small team. I also had the business side of the facility. And the business side means we started with no resources. I had to manage these resources matching the demand that we were getting. The demand was increasing at a phenomenal rate, so that's the business side. You also have to have some business skills in terms. And the colleagues were fighting to recruit as many people as they could. So I refused. I mean, I held that back, and I always explained to them. Later, they understood that an institution has to grow organically. Keep responding to the demand you are getting with the resources you're getting. Eventually, we hit a certain point, which is another high point of mine, when resources just started flowing in like that, because we've now been recognized as an institution having impact.
Yeah. Fantastic. Steve, you talked about learning, sort of, that you yourself continue to be on a journey of learning. What leadership qualities are you still working on in yourself? What maybe are some of the priorities that you still want to develop in the next, couple of decades?
I would say for myself, not really, because I am unlikely to be in a leadership position like I've been with the facility. It's quite exhausting. I'll probably have other leadership roles. So what I am developing now maybe is reading more on other areas that I'm interested in. I've already done a lot of boards, but that's, corporate governance. I could end up with quite a number. I've had a few invitations. So understanding, so that's an area which I'm trying to understand. Although I've dealt with boards, I mean, I've been on many boards. I was on the ALSF board, but I've also been on previous boards, having been a legal counsel and also governments. I was actually on some state institution boards. But the corporate world keeps changing. So that's an area I want to keep learning. And I keep learning. I mean, I still read a lot of material. People share with me information. So that's an area where I think going forward, I'll probably concentrate on.
Okay. And then in terms of, because I want to try and get some practical tips for people that are listening in today. You've talked about how you keep this folder or this dossier of management articles or leadership articles. Do you have any resources that you'd recommend to a new leader, to someone that is really focused on their leadership development, whether it's a book or a body of study or anything like that? What kind of resources would you suggest?
Oh, there's so much around. I should have got some, but I was so busy. I have so many articles, so I think I'll send them to you. I look around for articles. What is it called? The Harvard what? And the
Harvard Business Review.
Harvard Business Review. They always have fantastic articles. And what is the other one? The Boston Consulting Group, BCG.
Yeah.
So for me, those two are enough. They always have very good articles. You can even go into their database. If you want to look at, say, team management or developing the individuals, there's always more than enough. And the good thing with their articles is that they are practical. They are not theoretical. So they will do research that relates to what has happened. So you will see what has happened in some corporate entity. So those are my key looks. I subscribe to both of them on LinkedIn and I think Twitter. So every time I get an article, I look at it. And sometimes also McKinsey once in a while, but those two I follow them mainly. Boston Consulting Group, BCG, and the Harvard
Business Review. That's great, brilliant. Now, this is a question I always like to ask my guests in slightly different ways. But for you, what's the biggest lesson that you think African lawyers can teach their international counterparts? Because quite often, the question seems to be framed the other way. It's Africa learning from the rest of the world. But what is it that we as African lawyers have to export? What for you are some of the biggest lessons that we can share?
I think there is one big lesson, and we've done it as a facility. I was fortunate to know Africa very well and know the governments very well. I think almost every single government, I know somebody and a friend, but also understanding Africa. They actually don't understand Africa. We know it better. And that's a very loaded statement I'm making. The nuances of Africa, you have to know it's the African lawyers that know their governments, that know the way they think and what their plans are. That's a huge resource we underestimate. And that's why we were successful in ALSF, because we knew the governments. You don't deal with country X the way you deal with country Y. International lawyers tend to, not all of them, some of them have dealt in Africa for quite some time, so they are savvy, they know. But most of them tend to paint Africa with one paintbrush. It's not true. The way you deal with X, a country X, is not the way you deal with. And who knows that? It's the African lawyers. So that's a huge resource, without mentioning the legal systems and so on. But I think the main resource is knowledge of your own government, knowledge of your own systems.
And just, I guess, a bit of a lighthearted question. You've obviously traveled across Africa extensively. You've worked with many, many governments and interacted with many, many, different cultures. If you had to pick a favorite city or a favorite country, other than where you're from, what would it be and why?
I think I would have to say Seychelles. I've been to all African countries except one.
Okay.
So,
which is the country you've not been to?
It's only Algeria, and I had the opportunities, but somehow the meetings never took place there. So, okay. But all the others, including all the islands, I've visited them. I would say Seychelles is the one I would pick out.
And why would that be? I'm sure I can guess the reason, but
and it is the people. They are very friendly, they are very calm, and you really get an immediate feeling of, and it's very safe and stable. If you have a propensity to be, if you are quickly disturbed, if you go to Seychelles, I can guarantee you'll come back very calm. It has a huge calming effect. It has a nice climate. It has, they've retained their flora and fauna, so you have a kind of forest feeling. The vegetation is not tampered with. It's a very nice, and the people, mainly human beings, they are really nice.
Fantastic. Well, I can't say I've yet had the privilege of visiting the Seychelles, but it's definitely somewhere I would love to visit. I have a couple more questions for you, and then we're going to see if anyone in the audience has questions for you. So I want to just, I guess, look back and think, ask you what you wish you, if you could have, what do you wish you would have done differently? So maybe what advice would you have given your younger self as a leader?
My younger self, I would say that I have difficulty in pinpointing anything other than saying learn as much as possible. Be more open-minded. I was open-minded, but because I started working outside the country, that's when you become more open-minded. But there's never enough of that. What else would I say about the early life? And I think that's about it. Be more open-minded and learn. No limit to learning.
Yeah, and clearly you continue to learn. What do you consider to be the greatest or proudest achievement of your life so far? So whether that's personal or professional, and I guess you must have a ton, but what do you think? What would you say?
I think ALSF will have to be it. And when I was telling you about my history, it is like it was preparing me for ALSF. And not only that, I was involved in a lot of African initiatives. There was a general counsel at the bank actually who started an institution similar to ALSF called African Legal, what was it called? I've forgotten the name. That was Akin Olugbade. He started something like that in 2000. Yeah. He invited African Legal Network or something. And he invited us. I was actually on the board of that institution. And we already had that similar dream as ALSF. Subsequently, actually, is the one who started the idea of ALSF just before he left as general counsel. He initiated the idea. And then with all the initiatives, I was involved in so many other African initiatives. So I was actually known across the continent with most legal fraternity. And as I said, I was on the board of that institution that he established. Unfortunately, they left Abidjan and went to Tunis, and then the institution never took off. So then I come and get the opportunity to lead ALSF, which had similar ideals and objectives. And there is still a lot to be done. So I would say ALSF is my highest watermark. It was a dream job. So, I had acquired the legal expertise and regional experience in terms of knowing the continent. And then I had also been a manager at a high level, managing many people. So you have this unique opportunity. So it was like God sent. And when we started, I mentioned the challenges which we had, convincing people that you can use law for development. It was not easy. Mobilizing the resources. Somebody actually told me, you are on your own, go and mobilize the resources. We will not provide you with any additional resources. And here we are.
Well, I mean, Steve, we're hugely appreciative of everything that you've achieved. I mean, I know I've said this to you many times before. I have great respect for you, great admiration for everything that you've achieved. And I think, definitely it's a massive legacy in terms of the last 10 years that you've invested of your life, your time, your leadership, your skills. So it will be exciting to see what happens next, both for ALSF, but also for you. And just on that, what are your plans? What does the future look like for you? If you can give us a little glimpse, I don't know whether you want to give us an exclusive and share what's coming next for you.
Yeah, so I have so many things I want to do that sometimes I feel it's a bit too much. I think the most important, I want to mentor young people. A lot of the people I've worked with here, I mean, without sounding parochial, I mean, I was much older than them. They were starting their careers, and I think I mentored them. And I felt they came back to me feeling that they had benefited from working with me, learning some of these life skills and effort in terms of what they should do with their careers. So I want to continue with that. I think that will be my most important. In different ways, I might do it through a law firm, but mainly to mentor young people, not to do the work, the heavy lifting, to try and impact professionalism and ethical practice onto others. I want to pass that on. Yeah. But I also have other passions. I love farming, so I already started a commercial farm. I want to do that because it has a calming effect on me, especially if it's remotely in the rural areas. But farming that would also have an impact on the communities. So finding a way to relate to the community around you and assist them get out of poverty trap. I don't know how many of my listeners go to the rural areas, but if you go to the rural areas, you find quite a number of people are in a poverty trap. Just a little bit of encouraging them could help them get out of that. Yeah. So those are the two. I have some other ambitions. I won't say them now for now. I have a few approaches. I can't say them. Some of them are confidential until maybe after midnight tonight. For some boards, as I was mentioning, and I will respond to them. I haven't responded to them because, the job I do at the moment, you have to be careful for good governance. So
yeah.
Quite a number of them.
Well, I will definitely be signing up for some mentoring, please. So I'll definitely be approaching you. But just out of interest, the farming, is there a particular slant or focus that you have?
Yes, I actually started a coffee farm. Coffee is being encouraged on big scale in Uganda, so that's my main one. So coffee and avocado, those are the two big crops. I might abandon avocado for climate change reasons, but the coffee, I think I'll stay with.
Oh, wonderful. Now that sounds amazing. Coffee is one of my favorite things. So I definitely look forward to having coffee from your farm at some point.
You might see a package, an ALSF package.
Oh, that would be amazing. So Steve, we have a couple of questions that have come through from the audience. The first one, someone has asked if you can share some wisdom or advice on how general counsel, heads of legal can move from working in private sector into governmental international organizations like ALSF or COMESA, which I think is a fantastic question.
Yeah, I think I would say that there is not much difference from my point of view. Leadership is the same everywhere. So if you're going into a leadership position, that should be easier. If you're going into a technical area and you're not going into a leadership position, then the skills might be slightly different, because depending on the area, because multilateral institutions do something different. But if you're coming from a good private sector, then you probably have I would expect you have the sharpness, because the public sector pushes more the private sector pushes employees more than the public sector. But the public sector has some nuances you need to learn. For instance, in modern day, they push a lot on results. So you need to learn that. So quite a number of the team members who came in had to learn what they mean by results in public sector. They have these things that donors like M&E. At the end of the day, they make a difference because you are using taxpayers' money. So you need to account for it. So you have M&E systems, and then you account. So those are the areas, nuances that you will need to understand. Otherwise, leadership is the same everywhere. Managing a team, creating an enabling environment where the team thrives, those things don't change. And then, as I mentioned, if it's a lower level skill, then you may need to learn some of the skills. In terms of skills, I mean technical skills, say, is it a PPP? And then, of course, the diplomacy. For multilateral institutions, you need a lot of diplomacy. But a lot of the human skills will remain the same. You need some humility, and you need to find a way of working with people and remaining aggressive, remaining relevant.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd actually say, just in addition to everything you've said, obviously the ALSF has proven that it's open to, candidates or leaders from all sorts of sectors. Your successor comes from the private sector. And you said you'd had experience in the private sector as well. So clearly, it appears that these organizations are not necessarily looking for a particular type of experience. It's sort of that breadth of experience and that leadership capability, really. Fortunately, Olivier also worked in a multilateral institution, or a bilateral institution that was supporting multilateral. So he should be having those skills already. Yeah. He has those skills already. Yeah. He worked at ADF, so he already has some of those, but it is true. Okay, the other question that's come in is about giving some advice. So what advice would you give African law firm leaders to improve the status quo? Now, there are, I think, two things I would say. The first one is partnerships. I don't know, I've talked with so many of them. Why is it we have a problem in Africa having partnerships? Sooner or later, the partners fall out. The size of the firms actually makes a difference. You are more competitive if you have a firm that has specialization. So that's the second thing, specialization. Have larger firms, which means partnerships, and then have specialization. So if you are having somebody who deals with finance and banking, let them stick to that. If you have somebody dealing with infrastructure, PPPs, let them stick to that. Somebody dealing with mining, so the two issues which I'm mentioning go together. That would be my key advice. I've been talking with them all across the continent. Sometimes I sit with them in these conferences, talk on tea, and they don't realize I'm tapping their mind. Why don't you expand? And they tell me the challenges they have. I actually know that's a challenge because I don't know, it's not easy to say it here, but I have my own views. Maybe one day I'll write a book and say why. Then the second thing, for instance, we supported the establishment of African business, what do we call it? African Business Law Firms Association. So those associations are important on a continental level. They should lobby hard, all these institutions, for work. Lobbying doesn't stop. Those external institutions are always lobbying and finding out what you need. Another question. I know you've got to go, Steve, so I'm going to make this the last question that we ask you, actually, no, I'm going to ask you another 2 questions, if I may. We've got about 5 minutes. So a London-based lawyer is asked if you could say a bit about the kind of disputes that you've helped governments with, and how you found working with external lawyers. What behaviors do you particularly encourage or discourage in external lawyers or outside counsel?
So most of the disputes were investor disputes, state investor disputes. They are broken in 2 parts. Some are what they call vulture funds. That was the raison d'etat for establishing the facility. So they've purchased awards and they are enforcing. So those are the one category. Then the others are just investor state disputes, mainly international arbitration, exit, ICC, and so on. External lawyers, especially the big law firms, we had a big competition for them 2 years ago. They are absolutely efficient. And that's one of the lessons maybe our African law firms should have. Very professional, ethical in the main, but not always. Some of them, you have some tangle with some of them. You have to keep an eye on them. That is maybe the last question. Their behaviors, they are not always ethical. So you also have to watch that. Sometimes business drives and rules out the ethical, but otherwise, in the main, they are very professional. And after working with them, you establish a relationship with them, then respect for African governments. So one of the things we do, I mentioned the advantage African lawyers, firms have over them. Because you understand your African governments and people, respect is very important. Some of them come with arrogance, know it all, and they think they are preaching to African governments or African lawyers. I don't know whether you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. That's a wrong attitude. Yeah. So those are some of the behaviors that are wrong. For the ALSF, immediately we noticed that, we told them, sorry, we'll find a way. I never tell anybody no, but we'll stop working with them. If you come and show arrogance to our African governments or lawyers, you go in a meeting and you start preaching to them. There are quite a number. Of course, some of them have made a lot of money, so they become a bit arrogant, and then you come and start preaching to my minister. The moment we walk out, I'll find a way of terminating and ending that. You've got to respect our people. So those are some of the behaviors some of them do. There are quite a number that do that because, sometimes wealth breeds arrogance. So those are very important things. I mean, those are also the attributes our own lawyers should know. You find some of ours also becoming wealthy and beginning to behave like that. So those are very important things. Mm. They sound simplified, but they're actually big.
Very real issues.
The trust and confidence that the government is going to have in you to deal with this huge arbitration case actually depends on how much comfort they have with you. Mm-hmm. Where does the comfort come from? Respect. If you don't respect your client is going to run away from you. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the next question is actually quite closely tied to that. So you mentioned the need for competitiveness in African law firms. Is that to do with pricing, or is that competitiveness in a different sense? Are international firms charging less than their African counterparts? If so, is that competitive or actually anti-competitive behavior? The lack of competitiveness of the law firms is not on pricing. It's mainly on capacity to deliver. And I mentioned capacity to deliver goes hand in hand with specialization. Mm. So early on, in fact, we did test a few African law firms. So if I ask you for a legal opinion on a document and you're going to take a week, you can't compete. You get what I mean? Because you're going to take a week researching. The international law firm will do it within a day and will give it to you the next morning. So it's the competitiveness is on delivery. Right. And that delivery comes with specialization. The African law firms really need to have capacity to respond, responsiveness. And that's why I was talking about partnerships. If you are not going to have a big law firm. Then look at about 4 or 5 firms and sit together and say, why don't we look at the comparative advantage we have in the different areas? If you have mining and we see how we can share the bill. It's not the pricing. No. The pricing, then we would allow the African law firms have lower pricing, but so they would be more competitive. So it's really the responsiveness and the capacity to respond.
And just on that, I mean, I want to ask as we close out, how do you ensure that the international law firms that are, that are doing the work then translate or transfer that capacity to the local firms? Because obviously you've talked a lot about for the future where we need to get to and where we want to get to is to have African law firms much better positioned to be doing this work. But if you have the challenge of actually, an African law firm may take a week to do something that the international law firm will take a day for, that's a resourcing thing, that's an efficiency thing, that's also a capacity thing. So how does that get addressed? And how have you tried to address that as through the
So we did that early on with the team. We included a requirement that they have to include a portion for skills transfer. So we require every international law firm to partner with the local firm. And when we established panels, when we were doing the competition, we did panel A, which was open. So you had to show certain attributes to be competitive, where of course the international law firms won most of the, got most of the work, got onto most of the panels. But we also have a panel B, which we've been working on, which Olivier is inheriting. I'm leaving him with a heavy load on that one. Panel B is meant to be for African law firms only. So we'll also develop that one. But at the moment, an international law firm cannot get work unless they are going to partner with the local law firm. And they show us how they are going to transfer skills. They even have to have a training session.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant place to end our interview. Steve, thank you so much. I know you are packing up, rushing to the airport, got lots to do today. So thank you so much for spending time with me today and for spending time with the audience. Thanks to the audience for sticking through with us. I hope you found that a valuable session. It will be available on our YouTube channel. If you missed anything, we've recorded it, so we'll share that, and we'll also share some highlights on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Please do join us for future sessions of LGC Pulse. We interview a range of guests. If you have ideas as to people that you would like to see in the hot seat, please just reach out, send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. But Steve, we wish you every success. I look forward to my mentoring session and my coffee. And we will speak again very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I also enjoyed it, and we continue talking.
Yes.
We are still building our continent.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everybody. Happy Friday. Bye.